I want to go back to the point that you made about,
Please.
Drawing the connection between other humans by admitting your vulnerabilities, by admitting your, the fact that you have flaws. And I think that's actually what connects us as humans, is our shared suffering, our shared struggle, our shared imperfections.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to 3 Words, a bite-sized podcast about the small and yet very significant choices each of us can make in order to become the very best version of ourselves. My name is Dr. Michael Brown, and as you know, I am the host of 3 Words podcast, and today I am so honored to have with me for the second time here in our studio my dear friend, Martha Chandran-Dickerson. And Martha is a mother, a wife, 2 sons, thought leader, brilliant writer, a moderator for Be the Bridge, an activist and an advocate for social justice, a teacher and a mentor to me and our family. And it's just an honor to have you here today, Martha, to talk about, quite honestly, a very interesting 3-word phrase, which is
make a mess.
Make a mess. Now, I'm a father of 9 children. You have 2 of your own, but we have 11 children between the 2 of us. We probably wouldn't say to our children on a regular basis, why don't you go make a mess? And yet there's something about mess making that is really, really intriguing to you. Start our conversation, please.
Yes. Thank you for allowing me to speak about this.
Of course.
It's really a topic that's dear to my heart because it's a part of my life. Mess making is part of my life and the lives of many people, I think. And we don't talk about it enough, and we should. We live in this really performance-based, perfectionist, obsessed society, where we're constantly editing ourselves. Like social media, for example, we have this, and I'm going to use air quotes, curated imperfection. Even imperfection is curated, which is, I find really interesting. Even the family photos, everything is posed and it's, but we don't go around, with our families looking like we do in our family pictures.
For sure.
And I always love the, looking back at pictures, photo shoots, the ones that I actually evoke the most nostalgia and, warmest of memories are the ones that are like, the messy pictures, the ones where the one kid is not wanting to be in the picture, or the one kid is looking at the other kid and what is he doing? Those are the kind of, messy moments like captured in a photograph that I feel creates that memory that you're like, oh, I remember that time when they were that little and that was an actual moment. That was them being themselves. Similarly, like we look at, social media, like I said, the curated perfection, even Instagram, the Instagram is like, they have color schemes,
filters,
and, color schemes and themes that you're apparently supposed to adhere to. My Instagram is not like that. It's like a hodgepodge of different things. But, it is nice to look at the, Instagram, the aesthetically, like it'll be in kind of muted tones or, but I think in our lives, we need to, embrace mess and make space for mess making. Not to say that we should be like bull in China shop, like kind of pagan style where we're just making a mess because we want to and we're just creating chaos and, just being cavalier about it. But we need to, in addition to having some sort of order and structure and, in our pursuit of excellence, make room for mess making, because it is such an inherent part of, the creative process. And it's important to distinguish between perfectionism and pursuing order and excellence, because perfectionism is like this, it demands flawlessness instantly, immediately. I must be perfect now, whereas pursuing excellence and striving for, order and, is something that requires time, it requires pain. It's a process. It's ongoing. And it allows space for mistakes. Trial and error. Scientists, they have to, even with the vaccine, they had to do trial and error in order to figure out what is the concoction that's going to work what is the vial? What is it? It requires mistakes. And so we have to embrace messes in order to, live more richer, fuller lives, in order to be more successful.
Well, and I hear you. And you said it so beautifully, Martha, this notion that life really is a series of trials and errors, and that we're not going to be, nor ever will we be, perfect. It's interesting. Perfectionism, I think, is paralyzing. And we even talk about it in the life coaching world, is that perfectionism is a poison that we often drink unintentionally, but it just makes us sick, and it just makes us ill. And it actually is the counterproductive to becoming the very best version of ourselves. I'm excited about the topic too. I love how you talk about messes, because as a life coach and as a mentor, I'm drawn to messiness. In fact, I was just having a conversation with a group just recently where I just said out loud, you know what? You're a mess and I'm a mess. You have issues. I have issues. Let's just have an honest conversation. People chuckled in the room because there was a sense of like this, but it was almost like this like freedom chuckle, like, oh, wow. We all just acknowledged what we all know to be true, which is the fact that we're imperfect and that our lives at times can be a little messy. Now, obviously, I'm talking about the reality of messiness. You're talking about this notion of actually engaging in the process of making messes. I'm curious what that looks like for you, Martha, because what does making messes, actually initiating that process, look like for you?
Yeah, again, another good question. And I want to go back to the point that you made about, drawing the connection between other humans by admitting your vulnerabilities, by admitting your, the fact that you have flaws. And I think that's actually what connects us as humans, is our shared suffering, our shared struggle, our shared imperfections, our shared messes. And so I think stories, we need to engage in, the stories of our messes, because then when we say, okay, I've messed up and I've made a mess and here's what I've learned, then it gives permission to other people who are struggling with perfectionism, I know for myself, I've struggled with it, and I'm sure many people have, it gives us people that are struggling with it permission to be like, okay, messes and mistakes are par for the course, are par for the human experience. Absolutely. And so for me, like, I can think of, it's inherent to the creative process, as I said, making messes. And so my younger son, Jaden, who's 11, he is our more creative one in our family, and he's, extremely messy. He loves food, and he's a foodie, and he loves, he's always on TikTok looking for recipes, and he makes just a really, destroys our kitchen, like this, like pots and pans and utensils. Like, I don't know what's going on half the time. And, he's making things that I've never heard of. And, we've just kind of that's part of who he is, and mess making is part of his creativity. And even with his art, he likes to sketch, kind of strange things that I don't also understand, but he has spread his entire artistic self in our family room on our table. Like, it's just filled with sketchbooks and his work and paint, and just it's just completely all over the place, and it's a mess. And, that is, again, part of how he, finds fulfillment. And then it also, like, in my experience as a writer and as a tutor, as an educator, writing is in its very nature a very messy process. Sure. And this is something I've had to really work on with my students, and you are an educator too, and you've probably had to have these discussions with your students and even with your children. But there's, like I said, we live in such an achievement obsessed society, and students are living in that system. So they want to do due diligence and have this perfectly polished essay that they can submit to their professor in order to achieve that perfect grade that they really want. So they're doing their best to fit in the system. And so I have to come in as a tutor and kind of guide them and say, look, how about we look at writing not just as a product, this product, which is this paper or this grade that you want. Look at it as a process, like, how about you look at it as a journey? this journey of becoming a more confident writer and more introspective person, a more critical thinker. Think of it as a process, because if you have that big picture attitude towards your writing, you're going to become a better writer. And then the, byproduct of that is the strong essays, is the stronger grades, but fixate on the process versus just like, looking for those, the immediate, gratifications, because you're shortchanging yourself. Mm-hmm. And another example that so that example that I give about writing also reminds me of a quote by Anne Lamott. I don't know if you've heard of her, but she's very well respected in the writing community and says a lot of things about writing being this messy thing. And I want to share a quote, but I will say that I had to replace an expletive that she used with a euphemism, with a euphemism crappy. So when you hear it, you probably will sense what the original word was. But I think it really drives home this idea of messiness and writing being this non-linear process that, you can start with, you might even want to give in an essay and it's completely not good at all. And so what you have to do is now you have to revamp the whole thing. Start from scratch, and start all over. So it's not even this linear process. It's kind of some recursive. Sometimes you have to go backwards.
Interesting.
And circle back. And so I like what she said. She said, for me and for most of the other writers I know, writing is not rapturous. In fact, the only way I can get anything written at all is to write really, really crappy first drafts. And I think you know which word she meant by crappy. But it also reminds me, what she says about writing, brings to mind Barack Obama, who, we can disagree or agree with him politically, but I think all of us can concur that when it comes to, speaking, he is definitely a gifted and skilled orator.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
And so I, thought it was really interesting that, I saw this photograph. I think his photographer took a photograph of one of his speeches and, not his speeches, sorry, his notes in preparation for his speech. Uh-huh. And it was completely marked up with all kinds of scribbly, annotations. Uh-huh. And, so it had the text and it had all his annotations in there. And I was just wondering, how did he, I couldn't decipher what was on it. It just looked really messy, I'm like, how did you deliver this rousing, eloquent, articulate, speech from looking at this mess? But he did,
he did. And messiness was something that he embraced. What I'm taking away from this is that my horrible handwriting that my kids always make fun of is a sign of presidential greatness.
Yes, go for it.
No, I'm just teasing. But I just think this is so great because I'm thinking of all these parallels as well. You're talking about the creative process and avoiding perfectionism. And I love this notion of the first draft or the second draft, because in many ways, the life, even as a life coach, that what you're living right now is a draft. It's not the final product. It's a first draft, a second draft, maybe a 10th draft. And that's okay. Your messiness is okay. Your process is okay. The journey, we hear this all the time, right? It's a little trite, but the journey is as exciting and as formative as the destination itself. And I think it's really cool that we get to talk about the metamorphosis of human experience, the metamorphosis of creative imaginings. And I think about that because I'm even looking over, we're socially distanced, of course, during COVID-19, this pandemic, but you're wearing a butterfly.
I'm wearing butterflies, actually. I have a ring and earrings and a necklace.
Okay, so I see the butterfly ring, but I that's what I'm thinking about, this idea of metamorphosis. And I'm curious, why so many butterflies today?
I am obsessed with butterflies. Okay. I love butterflies, and not for the conventional reason that most people love butterflies. There are these magnificent winged creatures that just make our world so much more vibrant, by just by existing. Now for me, my love of butterflies, began with just the idea of how they become butterflies. Again, Jaden is my walking encyclopedia, and he shared with me, something that I wasn't aware of in terms of what the metamorphosis, involved. And he said that caterpillars, in order to become butterflies, have to literally digest themselves. Yeah, gross. Disintegrate themselves entirely. So they break themselves down and into this amorphous, amalgamated, gooey mess. This like nebulous, nasty, gooey,
Of course.
And they become like
amazing,
just a mess. But yet out of this mess emerges this magnificent winged creature that makes our world more vibrant and makes it the beautiful place that it is because of all the color that butterflies bring into the world. But it's that metamorphosis that always kind of like just has always resonated with me, and has been an encouragement for me. I've actually given butterflies as gifts, like in various forms, to like friends who have kind of gone through situations that kind of remind them of that experience, because it is pretty incredible that out of the mess that nature intentionally makes, this magnificence arises. And I think for me, I think a butterfly is, and there's a lot of other examples in nature that we can look at, but in this today we're talking about butterflies. It's a very important metaphor for this subject, because the caterpillar is willing to dissolve itself and to sit in its own mess, and to be in its own mess, and to embrace its mess, and to make space for all this mess, because it has to like spread itself out. And so we can do the same thing if we want to get to that place where we're richer, fuller, better versions of ourselves. Then we need to embrace that and make that part of our mantra and our way of living and being.
Wow. As always, Martha, my mentor, my teacher, to remind me that I need to make space for mess, that I need to not only make space for mess, but to sit in our mess.
I have one quote I want to add, if possible.
Of course.
And it's Toni Morrison. Like I told you, I love Toni Morrison because she's able to understand the human spirit so well. And, her definition of beauty is not, beauty was never one. In The Bluest Eye, she wrote, beauty is not something that we behold. It's not something to be held that we perceive with our eyes. But it's something to be done. Beauty is something that we can do. So if beauty is an action, then it requires us to roll up our sleeves and be messy, and to just do things, and then in doing so, be beautiful.
Wow. Thank you. Dear friends who are listening today, viewers, listeners, we've heard from Martha some very inspiring and truthful insights into creative processes as well as into life itself. That messiness is a prerequisite for metamorphosis, which leads to magnificence. So that's my encouragement for you today. If you tuned into this particular podcast, that you would be willing to get your hands dirty, that you would be willing to engage in the messy process of growth and evolving and maturity and beauty, even as Martha has described, in becoming the best versions of ourselves. That not only do we need to avoid the messiness of our lives, but I would encourage you today to think about, what is a mess that I can make even this week? Is there a mess that you've been avoiding that you can actually initiate in the days ahead? And what are those things in your life that you've been feeling, sad about or challenged by, that are beautiful messes in the works to helping you become the best version of yourself? Lean into that, engage with that, and be willing, at Martha's encouragement, to make a mess.